It's so exciting to welcome you back to our new day on our pilgrimage of Paul, literally following his footsteps here. And we are on a road called the Via Egnatia. So what an interesting name, right? Where does it come from? Well, if you are a general who's going to build something and you build a road like this in the 2nd century BC, you get to name it. And so why not name it after yourself? And so this was made by Via Egnatia back then. And I wanted to just show you on the side of the road what looks like a mile marker. It's certainly not an ancient Roman mile marker, but that's the idea. And what it's marking in Greek and Latin and even Hebrew, because we do have people coming here from Israel, apparently there's a lot of people who visit here, is marking the way of Paul. In fact, it's easy in Latin to see Sanctus Paulus, right? And this is also in Greek, but here is Saul, of course, the Hebrew name of Paul. His Greek name was Paul. And this is marking the way of Paul. Isn't that amazing? So if you're the type of person who likes to do things like the Camino de Santiago in Spain, or you like to walk the Jesus Trail over in Galilee from Nazareth all the way to Capernaum, where Jesus ministered, this is another place you can come. So why are we here walking on these ancient stones that are literally well over 2,000 years old? It's a really good road. The Romans knew what they were doing. Well, this is the road that is connecting the cities that we're following. You know, we started in Neapolis on the port, and so this road went all the way there. It connected Neapolis to Philippi, where Paul walked it, and it's connecting what we're doing today, and that is Philippi to the city of Amphipolis. A lot of people are like, what? Well, it's in the Bible. We'll talk about that as soon as we get there. But I wanted to talk about the road. So where does it start? Where does it end? Why is it important? Why don't we know about it? Well, anybody who's an historian has probably heard about it. And this road was made probably at the beginning so soldiers, could go from place to place. But the Romans looked not only to connect their empire militarily, but also commercially. So there was a lot of trade that happened on this road, connecting those cities and connecting the entire empire and allowing the gospel to be spread. And so what makes it interesting is it crosses the entire country of Greece. In fact, if you find the endpoint on the west, it's actually in modern day Albania, which was Macedonia back then, right? And so it connects all the way from modern day Istanbul, which would have been Byzantium back in Paul's time in that area of Asia Minor. And the Silk Road, remember, ended right there on what they call the Golden Horn, right, of that area of the water near Constantinople, near Istanbul. And then everyone gets on the Via Egnatia, and you're going to start taking your trade to Europe. So you would cross all of Greece this way, just like Paul did. And then it ends on the coast in the west. And if you cross the Adriatic Sea, you're going to make it to the city of Brindisi. You can see that on your maps in Italy. And from there, boom, it connects you to the main capital of the west, which is Rome. So it connects the capital of the Roman Empire to the west to the capital of the Roman Empire in the east, which is Constantinople. And that's what makes this place so important. So, as I mentioned, it begins in Corfu, but all of that, it connects what we're going to be doing over these next days. Not only Amphipolis, but Amphipolis, we're making our way also to Thessalonica, all right? So we're going to be making our way there after today. So follow me on this really cool ancient road, and we'll talk about what makes Amphipolis important as soon as we get there. What a cool place to stop on our Via Egnatia. It's quite a ways from where we were, but it's nice to be here. This is actually a monument right on this ancient road. In fact, as we speak, I'm sure you'll hear cars passing by because the ancient Via Egnatia is also the modern one. And so there's people who still use this pathway that takes us by this particular place. So why did we stop here? Because of this incredible monument. Let me explain what it is. It's actually in the context of where we are. This is the ancient town of Amphipolis. And so it was an important place. We're very close to the sea still. Its seaport was Leona. Leona. And so this was an important place because of its location. Now, if you think about where we were, I've used the word Macedonia. We know that Paul, stepped foot on this place called Macedonia. But it was important, especially for the Athenians who wanted to take control of it, and then the Spartans who later in the Peloponnesian War took it over. Because to the north of Macedonia, if you look at some of the ancient maps, is the area of Thrace. And so, if you look at the latitudes in a sense, it's at the same, latitude and further north than like Istanbul, which would have been Byzantium and Constantinople and all that. So the same city, right? So this would have been an area that these people wanted to control. And so being on the sea and being in a slight little bay or harbor, this would have been a really important place. And you can also see around me, there's wonderful forests here, pine forests. And so this place was known in antiquity because of the wood. And so they would make ships from the wood from here. And so this was an incredible place to be able to have control of. So, of course, as many places here in Greece, it was settled and by, different people. And then eventually, Alexander the Great, well, even before that, his father, as he was just over in Philippi as well, he conquered this place. He made it part of his kingdom. And then you see this lion behind us. They say that it was a friend of his son, the great Alexander the Great, right? Who had this made for him as a monument, perhaps a funerary monument. So they say that there were these Doric columns around, and you can see, some of the stones and all the other archaeological finds that may have been from this very area. Isn't that interesting? So they think it was in honor of him, or maybe even his brother or something like that. So this is where we are at. Now, one of the things I also wanted to mention is in this place, Paul did pass by because, as I said, he had to take this road to be able to go away from Philippi, right? So from Philippi, it actually says, I'm going to read this in the Acts of the Apostles, right here. This is what it says. I'm going to just read it. If you go to Acts 17, you'll see it. So there's lots of people that stop here because the lion is actually really cool. All right, so we know what was happening in Philippi. And so there was a huge issue. And so it says, if we start in chapter 16, verse 40. So they went out of the prison and visited Lydia. And when they had seen the brethren, they exhorted them and departed. So he was walking down the Via Egnatia like we were today. And then it says at the beginning of chapter 17, verse 1, now, when they had passed through Amphipolis, in other words, right here, and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews. So they were making their way there. Now, these two cities, it's interesting that you think, well, if Luke was with them, because it was Paul, Silas, Timothy, and Luke, why would he mention these if they weren't important? Well, it's not just that this was a place that was important in antiquity, it was also important at the time of Paul. And this particular statue, this monument, was here at the time of Paul. And so he would have seen it and been amazed at it just like we are right now. Now, they say that the soldiers who were here, I think it was in the First World War or something, found it over in the river. Now, the river, I just don't want to make a mistake, it's called the Strymon River. And Amphipolis actually means surrounded by. So this area was surrounded by this river. So in the river, they found the parts of this lion and they were able to put it back together. And then the archaeologists were able to put it back together and we can see how it is now. But it also became a place when Paul passed through that he probably continued to preach his message. And so when the archaeologists continued to excavate, because here we've got the lion, right? But the actual city is a little bit further this way. Okay, the ancient city. Uncovering it, they found 4 basilicas. Certainly not as big as the ones that we saw over in Philippi, but still, these are Christian basilicas. And even later than that, this became the bishopric of Thessalonica itself. Not the city of Thessalonica, this city. And so that speaks to its importance. Now, the other thing that I wanted to mention, besides the fact that they stayed here probably one night, is the next town that we read in chapter 17, verse 1, and that's Apollonia, right? So this particular city was also ancient, and it's a little bit closer to the coast. And we're not going there for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's a distance away. And secondly, they're really not sure where it's at. A lot of people, for example, well, there was a town actually in Greece that some decades ago, they changed its name to the birthplace of Aristotle. And then after they did excavations in a different place, they realized that that town was not the birthplace of Aristotle. So we don't know exactly where that city was. They know the basic location, but there's never been excavations. But it was important because, again, Philip II, Alexander the Great's father, conquered it back in the 4th century BC. It became a military and administrative headquarters for this area. And of course, being on the Via Egnatia, everybody passed that way. And Paul certainly passed that way. And so tradition has it that there was also a church on site there. So these are important cities. And did Paul stop and did he preach to people? Or were it the people who were with him, did they preach? And that's what I want to mention here. There are a lot of co-workers that were with him because he didn't just come here once. If we go back to the Acts of the Apostles, we can see that, especially if we go to chapter 20, he not only came here on a second missionary journey, he wanted to come back again. And not just to Philippi, but this whole area. And also, if you think about the fact that he wrote the letter to the Philippians, just like some of the letters he would write to the churches in Asia Minor, it wasn't just probably for the Christians in Philippi, principally, certainly, but also it was probably circulated in this area, especially on this trade route. When you have somebody like Lydia, who was such a businesswoman, doing a bunch of trade, she would take things back and forth. So if Paul didn't preach here exactly, and he may have, his co-workers did, his collaborators did, the people who heard his message very likely did. So in chapter 20 of Acts, it actually says, when the uproar ceased, because they're talking about Ephesus. Remember Ephesus, he was kicked out of there. He was, taking business away from the temple of Artemis and all those silver makers. It says, Paul sent for the disciples, and having exhorted them, he took leave of them and departed for Macedonia. So he departed from Macedonia, and when he had gone through these parts, he had given them much encouragement. So he was encouraging everybody, and he came to Greece, which is a bit further south. There he spent 3 months, and when a plot was made against him by the Jews as he was about to set sail for Syria, he determined to return through Macedonia. So he's come here a number of times, but who came with him? And this is what we read in verse 4. It says, Sopater of Berea, and we will see that after the day after we go to Thessalonica, which is day after tomorrow. So he's from that city. And also the son of Pyrrhus, who accompanied him, and of the Thessalonians. Okay, so that's where he is from. And then Aristarchus and Secundus and Gaius of Derbe, in the area where we were in Iconium, and Timothy, whom we know, and the Asians, Tychicus and Trophimus. There were a lot of people that we don't think about their names, but there were a lot of people who visited these places, and they went on and were waiting for them at Troas. So they went to Troas and all of that, and they stayed there for several days, which is what we talked about. So there were co-workers that brought Paul's message, even if it wasn't Paul himself that brought this message, right? And so I also wanted to point out that there are other people, we'll talk about them in just a second, that are women, and they're not just Lydia. But before we go into that, I want to go to a particular part of the letter to the Philippians that probably made its way also here. Now, if you turn with me, we're going to go to Philippians chapter 4. Now, let's just remember that the letter to the Philippians, it starts, before we go to chapter 4, let's start at the beginning. He's saying this, because this is the whole tone of the letter. I thank my God in all my remembrance of you, always and in every prayer of mine for you all, making my prayer with joy, thankful for your partnership. Okay, so we talked about that when we went to Lydia's place, but he's talking a great deal about joy. So if we go to chapter 4, verse 4, this is what he says. Okay, my brethren, whom I love and long for, my joy and my crown, stand firm in this way of the Lord, my beloved. And then he continues, and these are the co-workers that I'm speaking about, probably friends of Lydia. I entreat Euodia And I entreat Syntyche to agree in the Lord. And I also ask you, who are a true co-worker, help these women, for they have labored side by side with me in the gospel together with Clement and the rest of my fellow workers whose names are in the book of life. Lots of people are spreading the message at this point. And I do think it's an incredible example of what it means to be an apostle. And it's an invitation for us to say, okay, I need to also spread this word. But the focus is here, like I said, in verse 4. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. Let all men know your forbearance. The Lord is at hand. Have no anxiety about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. Look at that combination. Let your requests be made and known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will keep your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. That is quite a message, and there's a lot to unpack there. But the most important thing is to remember, like I said, Paul was in prison. What a crazy man. He's saying to everybody from prison, rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. I find joy in you, thanksgiving and all of this. What's the challenge he's giving to us as apostles of hope? How can we always rejoice? Perhaps some of you can really get depressed because of things that are happening in the world of politics or in the world where people are dying. And perhaps in your own life, you might be ill. Somebody that you love has passed away. Perhaps you've lost a job. Perhaps there's such a difficulty that you can't pull yourself out of, like I said, depression or something like this, or just deep injustice. How on earth can we rejoice in things like that? How can Paul say this to his followers and to the people in this area? Well, I'm going to turn to some reflections made by one of my favorite social media preachers, and that's Bishop Barron. And he often speaks about joy. He often does that, again, citing St. Paul, especially Galatians 5, when we're talking about the fruits of the Spirit. Now, he makes an analogy. I've seen some of these places, and he who studied in France has seen them. And if you look at some of the incredible medieval cathedrals in that area, not only do you see like a rose window, but there's like a circular window. Sometimes it reminds me of what we've seen, like those Christian symbols in the places of the ancient churches in Asia Minor. We saw them also in Philippi yesterday. It's like a circle with the Greek I and then the Chi, meaning Jesus Christ. And then you have the cross in the middle and the eternal circle, whatever. So it looks like that. It's like a wheel. And in the center, sometimes they'll just have a stone, or sometimes they'll have a small stained glass window where Christ, the Lord of the universe, is there. And if you look at some of the stonework, at the very top, many times you'll see a king there at the very top. And at the very bottom, you'll see a very poor pauper type person. And then different figures around the edge. And they call this... sometimes it's not the window, but sometimes it's in the church. They call this the Wheel of Fortune. So the Wheel of Fortune, I mean, we think of a game show, but for them, it was a very deep spiritual message that has to do with Ephesians 4:4. And that is, we don't know what's going to happen. One day I could be doing extremely well, dream job, fantastic experience, everything's going well with my family. There's a newborn baby here. And then the next year, the next month, I could be at the very bottom. Or just think of kings and great emperors like this, okay? Even Alexander the Great, he was in charge of a huge empire. And then eventually he died. Nobody even knows where he's buried, okay? He was at the bottom. His empire was torn apart by the generals who wanted to have control. Wheel of Fortune at the top, now he's at the bottom. He didn't have control over that. That's why they called it fortune. It's not something, like the circumstances in our lives that we can always have power over. So what does that mean regarding rejoicing? If we just go around and around and around in circles, if we have our life focused on the circumstances, like Paul, am I in prison? Am I being beaten? Am I being stoned? Am I being, pursued by people who want to do bad things for me? You're going in circles, you're getting dizzy, you're getting sick, things are terrible. And joy goes beyond just a superficial feeling of euphoria and happiness, and I just got out of bed today on the right side, I'm just happy because there's sunshine. It goes so much deeper than that. I'm not on the edge, I'm right in the middle. The axis of my life is Jesus Christ himself. And that's the message of Paul. One of my favorite saints is someone that also Bishop Barron speaks a lot about, and that is St. John of the Cross. He never came here to Greece, but he is from Spain, and he wrote the Spiritual Canticle and a number of other poems which really speak to my spiritual life and to my heart. And he speaks about the central part of life, not as a wheel of fortune with a stone like this one that I'm standing on, right? He speaks about it as an internal wine cellar. And so you go into the innermost part of your heart where it's protected deep, deep inside, and you find the beloved there. And in that place, of course, you enjoy the wine. And this is something that gives you joy. In fact, even in some Jewish feasts today, the Jewish people are commanded to drink wine because it's supposed to be a feast that you're supposed to live in great joy. So think about that. I'm in the deepest part of who I am. And when I am there, when my access is there, when I'm standing on the rock of Jesus Christ, that's when I can rejoice always. This is what Paul was teaching his coworkers. This is what the coworkers lived in their own flesh. Many of them were beaten. Many of them were stoned and almost died. Many of them were thrown in prison. Many of them became martyrs. Why were they rejoicing? What is this testimony of joy that Christians give? It's being grounded in the Lord Jesus Christ. It's being inside that wine cellar in my heart. Well, then how do I do it? It's exactly what you're doing during this Lenten season. We do this by entering into prayer. Prayer is not just, telling the Lord, hey, do whatever I want and what I need and stuff. Certainly that's part of it. But what it is entering into this intimate relationship. It's standing on the rock. It's making sure that my focus is the center and not the outside of the wheel of fortune. And so that means when I pray a rosary, when I go to Mass, when I'm reading the office, or praying the office, right, the divine office, all of those things bring me to center on Christ. And regardless of what happens externally, I can rejoice, just like Paul. So with those words, I just want to assure you, standing by this great ancient lion, that we are praying for each and every one of you from this place, from all of the cities that we're visiting along the Via Egnatia. And I want to thank you for joining us today. So let's keep walking. We've still got quite a ways to go to get to Thessalonica, as I say in Greece, Thessaloniki. So follow me, and we'll see you again tomorrow. And God bless you.